Okay, here we go. All right, I'm going to turn this fan off so we can hear a little better. All right, David, the one thing I haven't done is made you co-host so you can share your screen. Bear with me for a second.
Actually, I'm not going to be sharing it tonight. I'm just going to be talking.
Okay, well, that saves me a step. That's great.
Saves a step.
Speaker, there you go. If people want to go to the upper right corner of their screens and click on speaker as one of the view options, they'll get to see David or whoever is talking in this large way. Hang on just a second though. I brought my glasses, David, which I don't usually bring to astronomy club meetings because introducing you is a chore. Oh my goodness. So if I read or told you half the things that this guy is famous for, he wouldn't get a chance to talk tonight. All right, so we're very pleased to have David Levy with us. I have 3 blank GAAC Constitution and Bylaws volumes. We have a bylaw, David, that if we ever come up with a Constitution and Bylaws, they have to fit on one side of a 3x5 card. So what I did is I've got 3 little samples of David Levy. All right, the first one is awards and honors. All right, like Mario, he has an asteroid named after him, asteroid 3673 Levy. So that's pretty cool. He got an award from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, and he got the Bruce Blair Medal, Amateur Achievement Award from the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, the Edgar Wilson Award for discovery of comets from the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, and then I ran out of card. There are others. All right, he's recently published an autobiography, which you should all get from Amazon, A Night Watchman's Journey, The Road Not Taken, published in June 2019 by the Royal Astronomical Society. There we go, of Canada. So maybe we'll get a couple of copies of those and raffle them off. Okay, and also the thing that really appealed to me, a fellow lit PhD. He received in 2010 his PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and listen to the title of his dissertation. The Sky in Early Modern English Literature, a study of allusions to celestial events in Elizabethan and Jacobean writing, 1572 to 1620. Okay, so I thought that was a great note because that's not what he's famous for. I don't even have to touch on what he's famous for. Just stuff he's not famous for, I'd run out of time. So David, thank you so much for donating your time to GAAC, and I'll leave it to you.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to begin tonight with a poem in honor of Michael, whose favorite poet is not Samuel Taylor Coleridge, but it is one of mine. So I'm going to start with this. The sun's rim dips, the stars rush out. At one stride comes the dark, with far heard whisper o'er the sea, off shot the spectre bark. We listened and looked sideways up, fear at my heart as at a cup, my lifeblood seemed to sip. The stars were dim and thick the night, the steersman's face by his lamp gleamed white, from the sails the dew did drip, till clomb above the eastern bar, the horned moon with one bright star within the nether tip. One after one by the star dog's moon, too quick for groan or sigh, each turned his face with a ghastly pang and cursed me with his eye. Well, on that note, I hope nobody's going to do that to me during the next this lecture coming up. Especially Mario, I really want to thank him for thinking of me to talk to you tonight, and I'm really glad to be here. One of the people that also didn't like Samuel Taylor Coleridge the Rime of the Ancient Mariner quite as much as I did, was Leslie C. Peltier. And I'm sure you've all read Starlight Nights, The Adventures of a Stargazer. And Peltier actually quotes from Coleridge in Starlight Nights, but he changes it. The horned moon with one bright star within the nether tip. Peltier describes how he observed a partial eclipse of the sun on June the 1st, 1918. I think that was the day my mom was born. And he rewrote Coleridge a little bit because at maximum eclipse, he saw a horned sun with one dark moon within the nether tip. And I thought that's brilliant what he did with Coleridge's story. My topic tonight has to do, when I agreed to give it, it was my two astronomies. The one that I got into when I was a little kid and still going into it. The one that I got into to try to make the connection between astronomy and English literature. But now I have to change the title. I hope you won't be too angry. To my three astronomies. The third one happened shortly after I got a divorce or a separation from my first practice wife. And I started reading in Sky and Telescope about some old telescopes that were lying about. And I started to get interested in the history of the telescope and the Englishman who actually looked through a telescope at the moon a few months before Galileo did. Kind of an interesting footnote to the story of the telescope. Since I wasn't worried about having a marriage anymore, I decided to invest in a few telescopes. And I had about 3 at the time. And within a couple of years, it came up, mostly little old antiques that I would find. It got up to 15 and then 20 and then 30. And I way overdid it. I got, I think, up to about 50 at the maximum. And then one day I decided I can't do this anymore. And they have been since spread around. And I'm left now with, I think, about 10, all of which I use and all of which I dearly love. So that was the astronomy about the telescope. Now for a little bit about the astronomy that I began when I was a little kid. I was at summer camp, and it was in your neck of the woods. It was in Vermont. It was Brandon, Vermont. And Wendy, I know you're watching this, and you're invited, if I say anything wrong or something you disagree with, just holler. You can do that. Thank you. Yeah. Actually, I wanted to say, by way of interruption and introduction, that the discovery of Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 was the second most important event in my life. Of course, you wondered, well, what was the first most important event in your life? And that was meeting and marrying Wendy. And I have to say that, I think that's, I really do love her very, very much. And I'm so glad she's here, putting up with yet another lecture from David. Anyway, it was Twin Lake Camp. Some of you may actually be familiar with it. It's near the small town of Brandon, Vermont. And it was the first year I was there. I was 8 years old. I didn't realize then how badly my parents needed to get away. They wanted to have children, but they needed a couple of months a year without children so they could just enjoy each other without us. And they sent us to summer camp. And it wasn't until years later that I realized the reason why. And that is, a year before I was born, my parents lost my older brother, Donald. He was born with a heart defect. And in those days, they were untreatable. And he was so ill, and he died about 8 or 9 months after he was born. And Mom's agreement with Dad to continue having children, she had me and my brother, younger brother, was that she needed to have a couple of months away from children. And that's when they decided they would send us all to summer camp. Anyway, it was my 4th day at Twin Lake, and we were watching the fireworks for the 4th of July. And being born in Canada and still a Canadian citizen as well as an American citizen, I didn't know from the 4th of July. I had no idea of what it meant, what its significance was, only that they did fireworks. I kind of enjoyed the first bit of fireworks, but then they sent the younger kids back to their cabins and we're walking up the hill to the cabin. And of course, my little 8-year-old head turned up, saw the darkening sky, and suddenly I saw a shooting star. It wasn't a bright shooting star, and it lasted no more than a second and a half. It started right near a faint star and disappeared very close to a very bright star, which I now know was Vega. And the faint star that it started near was some star in Draco. It turned out I might have been the first person, and my very first observation of the night sky may have been the very first observation of an Omicron Draconid meteor. That meteor shower was just confirmed that very year by Dr. Brian Marsden before he took over as head of the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams. Anyway, I saw this streak of light and I asked the other kids, did you see that shooting star just now? And they all said, no, we didn't. And suddenly a thought entered my 8-year-old David brain. Was this meant just for you? Was this something that was just meant for you and no one else? And I really couldn't answer that. I did not have the strength to answer that at the time. And I sort of put it away in my head, where it stayed for about 4 years. I was on my way on June the 21st, 1960, first day of summer that year, to our elementary school graduation. Nowadays, elementary school graduation is a big, big deal. They have buses and bands and presidential speeches and congressional resolutions and everything. But they didn't in those days. All we had was a picnic. And I got on my bicycle and I wanted to get to that picnic. I rode along Victoria Avenue and there was a traffic light and I just made it through the traffic light to make my left turn onto the boulevard, name of a very big street in the town I was growing up. And I remember thinking, I better make that turn a little faster than I'm making it. The front wheel of the bicycle smashed into the curb. The bicycle stopped cold. I, on the other hand, did not stop. I went sailing ever so gracefully over my bicycle, landing on the sidewalk and breaking my arm. I didn't realize I was broken at the time. Another kid came up and said, do you need some help? And I said, yeah, I'm really bad. I really hurt my arm. If you could lift up my bicycle, we'll go to school together and I'll go to the nurse. I'd really appreciate that. And as I tried to stand up, my right forearm, gave such a pain, an agonizing pain, I just almost screamed. And I looked at the kid and I said, I'm not going to be able to get up. And I said, there is a policeman at the next block. Would you do me a big favor and go and get him for me? And he said, sure. And he went. He must have run pretty fast because the policeman was there within 3 or 4 minutes. They took me to the children's hospital. Well, it's kind of interesting how my family heard about this bicycle accident. The police called my mom and they wanted so hard for her not to worry. And they said, your son David was involved in a little thing. It's barely a scratch, but he fell off his bicycle. And we thought we'd better take him to the children's hospital just to get checked out, but it's nothing, it's nothing. And they did such a good job of telling my mom it was nothing that she said, well, maybe I should just wait home till you bring him here. And they said, oh, no, drive down to the hospital, but take your time, go slowly. There's no hurry. He'll be there waiting for you, and I'm sure he's anxious to see you. The principal of Roslyn School was the one that told my dad, and he wasn't quite so gentle about it. My father was already at the office, and he picked up the phone, and the principal said, "This is the principal of Roslyn School. Your son David has been involved in a serious bicycle accident. He has had arm and head injuries, and he's been rushed to the children's hospital. You better get there fast." 20 minutes later, my parents walk in together. Mom looks shell-shocked. She sees me with this sling on my arm and everything, and she couldn't believe it was as serious as it was. And the cops made such an effort to downplay it. Dad, on the other hand, who was surprised that I was still alive, broke out into this great big smile. And I was really annoyed with him. I said, "What are you smiling for? I'm hurt." He said, "Because you're alive and you're awake and you're speaking. That's what I wanted to see." Anyway, the end of that story is that my cousin gave me a book called Our Sun and the Worlds Around It. I read it once while I was in the hospital. I read it again at home. And I think I've now read it. It's still in my library right there. And it is, I must have read it several hundred times by now. But it only took me one reading to decide that astronomy is what I wanted to do. At the end of that summer, I got my first telescope. It was a 3.5-inch reflector, a very nice skyscope. I still have it, but it isn't here. It is now at the Linda Hall Library in Kansas City. So, and I hope some of you will visit the Linda Hall Library sometimes. It is one of the finest science libraries in the world. And it has my first telescope there, plus all of my observing records, the originals of everything from the mid-50s up until tonight, when I'm going to be looking at the moon, a variable star that I love to look at, and just generally looking up and enjoying the night sky. In addition, the records of all of my comet discoveries are there. In 1965, December 17th, I decided to search for comets. It was October, actually, that year. I was actually reading things in French, growing up in Montreal, and I knew that they wanted you to be bilingual if they were going to graduate you from high school, at least this high school. And I knew that one of the questions would be, what do you want to do as a career? And I hadn't decided yet. Of course, you're not supposed to decide that young, but I wanted to decide right then and there, what do I want to be? I'd been reading about the discovery by Akea and Secchi of a wonderful comet that was on its way to a hairpin turn around the sun. Comet Akea-Secchi could be and was the brightest comet of the 20th century, a wonderful, wonderful comet. And as I'm thinking about that comet, the thought came to my brain, I wanted to search for comets myself. That's what I want to do in life. I want to search for comets. So I got to the school, went into the boardroom for the French oral exam, and the professor, Mr. Hutchison, and I still remember what he looked like that day. He's sitting there and he's asking me some questions, and I'm answering them en français. And then he asked me, said, now the question, what do you want to do as a career? And I was so proud. I sat straight up in my chair and I looked at him, and I said, Monsieur Hutchison, je veux découvrir une comète. Mr. Hutchison, I want to discover a comet. The man looked at me, he looked at the others around him, took off his glasses, put his glasses back on, and he said, Levy, how the hell do you expect to make any money doing something like that? And everyone in the room started laughing, including me, including him. And then he said, okay, I will give you credit for the answer. I'll give you full credit for your answer, if only because in all the years I've been doing French orals, that's the most unusual answer I've ever gotten by far to that question. However, you better promise me that you're going to stick to this and you're never going to give it up. And I'm going to come back in 20 years, and if you haven't found a comet yet, I'm going to lower your grade. And so I took him seriously. On December the 17th that year, I started searching for comets. I also started searching for novae. And I actually had some early success with novae. On August the 30th, 1975, I looked up at Cygnus and noticed a very strange, bright extra star in Cygnus. First, I thought it was a satellite, but then I noticed it wasn't moving at all, very slow moving satellite. And then the satellite was moving at all. When I realized it was a nova, which was very quick, I really was beyond excited. 1978, I made a second independent discovery of a nova, and that also in Cygnus. So Cygnus for me is a good place to find novae. But still, a comet was eluding me. I went to Acadia University, took an English degree there. And do you think I had any sense of the connection between astronomy and English literature throughout 4 years at Acadia? No, not a bit. Even though I read King Lear, these late eclipses in the sun and moon pretend no good to us. Even though I read Julius Caesar, when beggars die, there are no comets seen. The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes. Did I make any connection at all? The King Lear reference I even remember underlining in my copy of Shakespeare, without making any real note that Shakespeare was writing about astronomy. Anyway, in 1972, I graduated from Acadia with my BA. A couple of years later, I started at Queen's University to get my master's. That's where the second astronomy began. I actually already at the beginning of this lecture told you about the third astronomy, the telescope collection. Then came the first one, and now the second one. I was observing Lyrid meteors with the Montreal Center of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. A whole bunch of wonderful people, good friends. I still am friendly with them. I'm their honorary president, in fact. So I bring you greetings from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. Anyway, I was observing the meteor shower. It was a clear night, and there wasn't a whole lot of meteors. There was one here and one there. And there were not that many people there, and I remember my mind wandering. I wonder if any other people, astronomers in the past, like Leslie Peltier, was up observing Lyrid meteors in past years. I wonder if any other astronomers who I'm not familiar with observed the Lyrids in past years. Then I wondered, then I finally made the connection. Has any poet been inspired by a shooting star to write a poem? And that really got to me. I started thinking about it. The very next day, I was supposed to meet my thesis advisor at Queen's, Dr. Norman Mackenzie. And it didn't take me long once I finally made the connection that I wanted to do a master's thesis on the night sky and in Victorian poetry. And as soon as I told Dr. Mackenzie about it, right away he said, then you've got to study Gerard Manley Hopkins, because he was an amateur astronomer. He loved telescopes. He loved looking through telescopes, and he loved writing poems. And he actually wrote a poem about a comet. And I'm now going to quote from memory that poem to you. Hopkins, for those of you who have studied him in high school or college, is one of the most difficult poets to read. He uses sprung rhythm and all these weird rhyme schemes that are very difficult to understand, even harder to follow. A lot of students just don't like Hopkins at all. And I was going to be one of them until I came across this thing that he wrote when he was at Oxford University as an undergraduate. I am like a slip of comet, scarce worth discovery, in some corner seen, bridging the slender difference of two stars, come out of space or suddenly engendered by heady elements, for no one knows. But when she sights the sun, she grows and sizes and spins her skirts out, while her central star shakes its cocooning mists. And so she comes to fields of light. Millions of traveling rays pierce her. She hangs upon the flame-cased sun and sucks the light as full as Gideon's fleece. But then her tether calls her. She falls off, and as she dwindles, sheds her smock of gold amidst the sistering planets, and then goes out into the cavernous dark. So I go out, my little suite is done. I have drawn heat from this contagious sun, to not ungentle death, now forth I run. There's a lot in that poem. There's a lot of magic and a lot of sky and a lot of poetry in it. I gave a symposium at Dr. Mackenzie's Hopkins class on it. He loved it. And that actually became my project to determine, Hopkins just didn't write about any comet. He had to be writing about a specific comet. Could it have been Donati's comet in 1858? Too early, I thought. I don't think so. Then there was the Great Comet of 1861, discovered by Tebbutt in New South Wales, Australia, as like an 8th magnitude thing moving straight north. And suddenly when it appeared over England with its head near the star Capella and its tail going all the way across the sky, it was just magnificent. I thought that Hopkins was thinking of the Great Comet of 1861. I went to Dr. Mackenzie, I said, it's the Great Comet of 1861. And Mackenzie said, no. I said, why not? There's the comet he's writing about, if you really want to find it out, had to be very faint when it was discovered. And this one was pretty easy to be discovered. And so I thought my work wasn't quite finished yet. How about Temple's Comet and Temple-Tuttle and Comet, not Temple-Tuttle, Swift-Tuttle in 1862, the parent of the Perseid meteor stream. It must have been that one. But by then I was thinking, no, it's the same thing. That was, comet became pretty bright, but it was pretty bright at discovery. And I kept on looking and getting a little more disappointed and discouraged. And till finally, while reading one night in the Queen's Library, the Illustrated London News, there was an article about the comet, which was the comet of 1861. But then later on, a few years later, there was a letter about a comet that had appeared in 1864, August 1864. I got interested because the date of Hopkins's poem was September 1864. And I read the article, and it said, shortly after discovery, it passed between two stars, Beta Aurigae, Iota Aurigae, let me get this right, and Beta Tauri. They weren't faint stars, but the comet made a pass directly between them as it was brightening. This was a little bit too much. Not only did I think Hopkins had the comet, but I think he actually observed that comet in the morning sky and quite possibly observed it the night that it went in between those two stars. I ran over to Dr. Mackenzie's office with the news, and he listened to me and he said, no. And I said, it really wasn't that funny, it was. But I said, why not? He said, because you have said, bridging the slender difference of two stars, you correctly found two stars, Iota Aurigae and Beta Tauri. A beta star, he was a Greek scholar, is much brighter than an Iota star. So it can't be that comet. And I sat up in my chair and I said, Dr. Mackenzie, I may not know much about English literature, but I do know this guy, and I know Beta Tauri, and I know Iota Aurigae. Auriga has many more bright stars than Taurus does. So the Iota Aurigae star turns out to be less than a magnitude fainter than Beta Tauri. Dr. Mackenzie looked at me and said, are you serious? I said, yes, I know those two stars. And he said, David, you got it. It's got to be that comet. It has to be. And this is going to be the central chapter of your thesis because you figured it out using your knowledge of literature and of astronomy. And I finished the thesis. There was a whole lot of other things. Hopkins wrote a lot of good astronomical poetry, in particular, The Starlight Night, one of my favorites. But my favorite Hopkins poem is clearly the poem that he wrote about comets when he was a young student at Oxford, at Balliol College. This was a very exciting thing. I got my master's degree and then relocated to Southern Arizona because I really wanted to get back to my observing and I wanted to discover a comet. And I told my parents that I'd probably move back to Canada after I found my first comet, if I ever found one. On November the 13th, 1984, I set up my telescope to observe after having a dinner date with a friend of mine from the local planetarium. I set up my telescope, was looking at comets, and I found a couple of interesting objects in that hour. There was a planetary nebula that obviously isn't a comet because you can see the central star. There was a globular cluster, and that's obviously not a comet because you can resolve it. And things were going pretty well. And a friend of mine called and we started to chat, the phone in the observatory so I could talk while searching. And then I saw an open cluster, NGC 6709. Anyway, that was a little bit odd. I mean, the cluster obviously was an open cluster. I could resolve it easily. But a little bit to the north of it was another fuzzy object. And in mid-sentence, I stopped what I was saying and I said, oh my. And my friend said, what is it? And I said, well, it's something. It's a fuzzy spot. And he asked a few questions. And I asked him to hold the line a minute, got out my atlas, found NGC 6709 pretty quickly. And right away, I noticed no nearby fuzziness near it. And so I picked up the phone again and I said, I'm going to have to call you back. I need to deal with this. So we ended the conversation and I took out my sketch pad and I did a sketch. And I did some more looking up, went back to the telescope and I said, you did a terrible job on that sketch. This little fuzziness should be quite a little bit to the north of where you put it. So I erased it and I put it a little north. I put it down again, did some more work, went back again. And then I said, you still don't have it right. It's still a little bit further to the north. Wait a minute. Wait just 1 minute. This time I called a friend of mine at the Lowell Observatory, a place that I'm going to visit in a week from now in person, to give my first in-person lecture that I've given in over 2 years. So I'm a little bit nervous about that. Anyway, I called this friend at Lowell and I told him the position and he said he would check it out. And about an hour later, he called back and he said, send a telegram, you got a comet. This was the only comet discovery that I made that I actually sent an old-fashioned telegram about. All the rest was done over email. Anyway, I sent the telegram, and when it was done, I thought, oh, I should call my friend who I had dinner with. And she picked up the phone. She was just finishing up an event at the planetarium. And she said, well, I told you when you left that you better find a comet for me tonight. Did you? And I said, yeah. And she said, and she started to laugh. And she said, where is it? I said, oh, it's in Cygnus. No, it's actually in Aquila. It's in Aquila. She laughed some more. And she said, how bright is it? I said, about 9.5, and it's moving slowly to the north. She stopped laughing. She said, you're serious? I said, of course I'm serious. We got off the phone, and the next day, after it was confirmed, the news headline in the local paper said, skips out on date, discovers comet, on the front page of the local paper. And that was really exciting. I beat Mr. Hutchison's rule by 1 year. It was 19 years, a total of 917 hours and 28 minutes. And when that announcement came out, there were a number of people that I know very well who were receiving the printed circulars at that time. And one of them was Roy Bishop at Acadia University, then the head of the physics department. He opened the circular, read about comet Levy-Urdenko, and he said he virtually burst into tears. He said, after all these years, the idiot never gave up, and he kept on doing it. I found another comet in 1987, a third one that same year. And a few years later, I finally got to meet two very special people, Jean and Carolyn Shoemaker. We observed together, and on the way back, I asked them if it would be all right if I observed with them at Palomar one time. And they said yes. In fact, I'd kind of enjoy that. I started observing with them during the summer of 1989, about 2 days after I'd found my fifth comet. And during 1990, we had a good time. There was the first of the Shoemaker-Levy comets was found that year, and the second one was also found that year. 1991, we found a slew of new comets. I think we found 7 Shoemaker-Levy comets that year, 6 or 7, plus one visual one that I had. 1991 turned out to be the most productive year that I had in finding comets. Not only one in 92, and nothing in 1993, until we had a very, very cloudyish night with a lot of clouds moving back and forth, but we decided to observe. I was able to get the first image that we were going to take. And I remember thinking, I sure as heck hope I never have to show this picture to anybody, because I can barely see the guide star. It'll be a horrible picture. And we had to wait. We usually take the next picture about 45 minutes later, but because of clouds, we had to wait almost 2 hours before we could finally get the second picture of the pair. 2 days later, on the 25th of March, I'm sitting reading. Jean's reading Time magazine and Carolyn's scanning. Suddenly she stops scanning. She looks at me, looks at Jean, and she says, Jean, David, I don't know what I've got, but it looks like a squashed comet. And I knew Carolyn had a wonderful sense of humor. And when she came closer to me as Jean was looking, I said, you are kidding, aren't you? And she said, no, I'm not. And then I looked at Jean, and Jean looked at me with a look on his face I've never seen before, of absolute bewilderment. I had to see this for myself. It was a bar of comets. not a single one, but a bar of 6 or 7 comets, all together, joined together at the head, each with a tail going up to the top of the film, and then a bar of cometary light going off in each direction. I couldn't believe it. It was just on both of the films, so I knew it was not an artifact, and it was real. I sent an email to Brian Marsden saying that we had found something and describing it briefly. And then I said, as soon as we measure it, we'll send you the position, which we did. And the next day, it was announced as comet Shoemaker-Levy. We fast forward now till May 22nd. It's a lot better. The weather's a lot warmer, a lot nicer. It's my birthday. We're celebrating. There's cake. And then Carolyn goes back to scanning. Jean goes to loading films for the night observing. And I decide to check my email, which is something I still do too much. Anyway, first email was 2 circulars from the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams, both on our comet, which has now been renamed Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. Right away, I told Carolyn, I said, there's something going on with our comet. That didn't totally surprise me, because a couple of days before that observing run started, Brian Marsden wrote to me saying, I'm not sure yet, and I can't tell you yet, but there may be some big news about your comet in a couple of days. So I thought the fact that they had named it a periodic comet was the big news. That wasn't the big news. They said that this comet was not even orbiting the sun directly, but it was in orbit about Jupiter. And it was a very long, elongated, almost parabolic orbit, going as far from Jupiter, as Mercury goes from the sun, and then back in towards Jupiter. Apparently in 1960, 1972, a couple other years, that comet came so close to Jupiter at what they called its perigove that the comet actually almost collided. But it didn't, it survived. But then in 1992, July 1992, the comet came within Jupiter's Roche sphere. So it came so close to Jupiter's cloud tops that it passed the Roche limit and the comet broke apart into multiple pieces. We had seen about 7 or 8 of them, but someone else using a bigger telescope counted 21 fragments, like a string of pearls, he described it. Anyway, years ago, I had asked Brian what we would do if he had got an announcement that an asteroid or a comet was going to collide with the Earth. How would he break that news to the world? He said, first thing I do is pet my cat. No, no, that's not what he said. That's an aside. The first thing I would do is I would list the orbit of this comet, but I would also include the delta, the distance from the comet to the Earth. And anybody reading it closely would see the distance decreasing and decreasing until the distance from the center of the Earth was less than the Earth's radius. And then they know it would collide. And that's exactly what he did. He did that thing. And you could see the distance to Jupiter, but I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that. I went right away to the second circular where he broke his own rule and he said there is almost certainly going to be a collision. And he said the estimate right now is that there is about a 60% chance that at least some of the fragments will collide with Jupiter between July 16th and July 23rd, 1994. About 2 days later, a group at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory did similar calculations and revised the calculation, the conclusion, from 65% probability of some fragments colliding to a 97% probability of all the fragments colliding. And boy, I'll tell you, that shake the world of astronomy apart. I remember as time went on preparing for it, I did not realize that day when Carolyn said, I don't know what I have, but it looks like a squash comet, how the comet would grasp the three of us in its tail and take us on its final journey around Jupiter. I do remember in early, let's see, it was early, what was it? Hold on a second. It was early March of 1994. We're all sitting another cloudy night, and Jean says, so where are you going to see the impacts from? And I said, I'm thinking I'd like to see them from California, because California is the state that has the highest amount of clear weather during the summer months. My home in Arizona does not, but California does. So I thought that would be a good idea. I said, where are you guys going to be? And Jean said, Carolyn and I will be in Washington. Where are you going to be? I said, well, I just told you I'm going to be in California. And Jean looked at me a little more intently this time. He said, Carolyn and I are going to be in Washington. Where are you going to be? And I said, I think I'm going to be in Washington with the two of you. And he said, that's what I wanted to hear. Because we're a team. This is obviously going to be the high point of our careers. We need to be together. What if there's nothing to see? We need a rock the three of us could hide behind. And I said, yeah, but what if there is something to see? He said, aha. We now fast forward to the Space Telescope Science Institute on the afternoon of July 16th. We are in a chair being trained on how to do a nationally televised press conference. We're sitting where they're telling us how to sit with our jackets underneath us so that they won't look wrinkled. And we're going to tell the discovery of this comet this way. Even if there's nothing to see, there'll still be a story. Almost at that moment, one of the observers from the Space Telescope Science Institute opened the door and quickly ran down the stairs and presented a photograph to Jean. And Jean looked at it. He rose from his seat. He said, you mean they saw plumes? On the first impact, they saw plumes? Boy, did that practice session end quickly. We all ran to the nearest computer. And by this time, reports were coming in from all over the world. This was going to be a week. And as Heidi Hamill said in the press conference that night that we were a part of, he said, we're in for an exciting week. And that was exciting. I remember one of the most exciting parts was the impact of the fragment G, which left a dark spot on Jupiter, much larger than the Earth, easily visible with the finder of a telescope. Very, very nice to see and very pleasant. And I remember we did press conferences every day. And there was one press conference, some of them Jean and Carolyn were part of, some of them I was a part of. The one on Thursday, July the 20th, I was a part of. And I noticed that Jean came in at the back door and was madly waving at me. Come here, come here. And I looked at the lady sitting next to me and I said, nothing is going to keep me from this press conference. I'm supposed to be here. Here's where I will stay. And Jean kept on motioning for me. And I just shook my head. He came over to me and he said, David, we've been invited to the White House. And I looked at the lady and I said, accept that. I got up quietly and left. We did get to meet the president, President Bill Clinton at the time, but the highlight was our conversation with Al Gore. And he had an interesting thing. He didn't want to talk about politics. He wanted to talk about the comet. And he said that he reminded us that he lives at the Naval Observatory, which right away gives him access to one of the best telescopes on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And he said, last night, I went to the Large Refractor Telescope. There was somebody there I walked in and I asked if we could look at Jupiter. He said, I've already got it. And I said, don't say it. I wanted to be able to say, I saw the impact spots before the vice president did. So please don't say that you saw them last night. He said, I saw them last night. And we had a good laugh over it. And I was able to see those spots for over 6 months. Jupiter went behind the sun, came up into the morning sky with the spots still there. They lasted, they were detectable for almost 10 years afterwards. And with the end of that highlight of my life, I went back to my life. Jean and Carolyn went back to their lives. We stayed very close. Jean was killed in a car accident in 1997, just a few months after Wendy and I were married. And Carolyn lost her life just last summer in August of 2021. And the reason that I'm going to Lowell Observatory this next weekend is to honor Carolyn Shoemaker. We will be celebrating her life and the life of her husband, Gene. It was a very, very special thing. And I really miss the friendship, the closeness, the fun that I had with Gene and Carolyn. But I'm still doing stuff. I'm still searching for comets. I'm no longer collecting new telescopes because if I were to say right now that I am, Wendy would jump out of her chair and say, no, you're not, because I'm not, I have enough telescopes. She thinks, and if that's what Wendy thinks, Wendy is correct, I do. But I do want to have to do a couple of quotations with you. One of them is going to be from my favorite writer, Shakespeare, the person on whom I did my doctoral thesis on. And it is a quotation that I believe all of you are familiar with. It is one of these times in one of his most famous plays, Macbeth, when one of the most important events of that play is happening. That is, his wife, Lady Macbeth, has just died. And her servants come to the king and they say, the queen, my lord, is dead. And I imagine Shakespeare sitting there with his pen and his telescope. Well, he doesn't have a telescope, but with his pen. And he's wondering, what am I going to write? And he's thinking and he's starting and crossing out and thinking. And then after a while, there's a tap on his shoulder. And he turns around and God is standing behind him. And God says, Will, take a break. Get yourself a cup of coffee. I got this. And he comes back and he sees this writing. To say that William Shakespeare anticipated by 3 centuries, Einstein's theory of general relativity would be a bit of a stretch for the following quotation. But it is plausible. And to make it plausible, I will add one final line to the quote. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in its petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And then there's heard no more. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, signifying everything. I just wanted to share that with you. And now, as I come to the end of my presentation, I'm back to being just David, an amateur astronomer, enjoying the night sky. And Wendy, would you like to join me in the final quotation? Ralph Hodgson wrote the Song of Honor in about 1917. And Wendy and I are going to quote the final stanza of that poem to you. And it goes like this. I stood and stared, the sky was lit. The sky was stars all over it. I stood, I knew not why. Without a wish, without a will, I stood upon that silent hill and stared into the sky until my eyes were blind with stars. And still I stared into the sky. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
It's an honor.
Thank you.
David, can you take some questions?
Certainly, I'd be happy to.
Anybody in the room first?
One thing that I would like to say is I know Mario is here tonight, and I want to say a special hello to him. He has made several visits out to us here in Arizona, and we miss being there, and I hope to be there in person at some point.
January. There's an AMA meeting in January I have to go to Tucson. I'll be there.
Okay, we'll be expecting you in January.
I have a question, David. What is your routine when you go out to search for comets? How do you begin? How do you continue?
If I'm using this telescope, which I have here, this is not a picture, this is the real telescope, I can actually show you. I have it fairly close to the horizon. I put my eye and I move up and down. I move up the sky a little and then over and then down the sky a little bit and then over and then up the sky at about the rate of about a degree per second. Sometimes I move a little faster than that, which is a mistake. Sometimes I move slower than that, which usually is better. So maybe half a degree a second is a much better rate. I have no illusions that I'll ever find a comet now, and partly because of our discovery of Shoemaker-Levy 9. One of the things that Gene Shoemaker had to do in 1994 was to testify before Congress about the need to have these big programs discovering possible Earth crossing asteroids and comets. And now virtually all comets are discovered by these programs. And for a amateur to discover a comet, it still happens. In fact, I found my most recent one visually in 2006, but it's very rare that a visual observer will still discover a comet. But I'm still doing it because I love doing it. Would any of you like to start now? If you haven't started yet, I would recommend that you don't. You go into some other field. And the reason is that it's just, the cards are so stacked against visual discoveries right now. However, even though I've done many thousands of hours now of searching for comets, a lot of them with this telescope, it's actually observing meteor showers. That is something that I think I enjoy doing more than anything. And while I have you here, on the night of May 30th of this year, the Earth is going to plow through the debris of material left when comet Swashman-Walkman 3 broke apart in the late 1990s. It left a ton of meteoric material, and the Earth is going to go right through the center of that. We don't know how strong, if any, the meteor shower will be, but we do know the time. I believe it is 10 o'clock Arizona time, which is 1 in the morning Eastern time. It'll be in and out of this swarm in about 5 minutes or so. So it may be just a burst of meteors for a very short time. But I sure as heck am going to miss that. And I don't recommend any of you to go either. That is something you want to see. The other thing you want to see is the eclipse of the moon this Sunday, because eclipses, more than anything else, prove the solar system is not static. Things move. The moon orbits the Earth orbits the sun. And during a total eclipse of the moon, you can actually see the moon as it's orbiting the Earth. and going through the shadow of the Earth.
Well, we're hosting an eclipse party here.
Oh, that's
Sunday-
great. And
Sunday
good
night.
luck. I hope you guys do well.
Well, we hope the sky does well. That's all we need.
Yeah.
Oh, David, you asked me a question about my favorite Coleridge poem, Frost at Midnight. I don't know if you know that one. He's talking to his baby boy, and he's telling him, there's a line, therefore all seasons may be sweet to thee. And he goes on and talks about a few seasons. Then he gets to the winter and he says, or if the dewdrops fall, heard only in the trances of the blast. Or if the winter shall hang them up in silent icicles, quietly shining to the quiet moon.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. Thank you.
Frost at Midnight. You should look it up. It's really great.
I promise that I will. What's the title of it again?
Frost at Midnight.
Frost at Midnight. Thank you.
Hey, David,
Yes.
I have actually two questions. One, I'm a little sensitive about asking. I noticed that you wear glasses, and do you wear glasses while you view, number one? And have you noticed that you have more or less difficulty as the days progress with viewing? I'm asking that because I am having those difficulties.
Yeah, those are good questions. I do not use my glasses when I'm looking through a telescope, as I just demonstrated, because the eyepiece of the telescope acts as a glass if I focus it properly.
Yeah, that's what I always thought.
And the glasses that I wear, these Buddy Holly glasses, I didn't realize that Buddy Holly is one of my favorite singers back from the 50s, wore this type of glasses until I read the Wikipedia article about him. And there's a picture of the site near a road where his plane crashed and he died there.
Yeah.
And all that marks it is a hole in the ground and a pair of those glasses. And I think it says it all.
Very
But
stylish.
these are green Buddy Holly type glasses.
Well, my other question is, could you repeat the name of that meteor swarm and the date? Was that the 30th of May, 31st?
It's the 30th of May, the morning of the 31st, where you are. The Tau Hercules, it's an annual shower. This is a little bit away from when the normal maximum is, but this is a special set of debris. So
All
the
right.
date is different.
All right, thank you very much.
It's really related to the Tau Hercules. It should be a lot of fun, even if we don't see anything.
Right on, thank you. Great storytelling.
Alan, unless you have astigmatism, it's better to take your glasses off and refocus.
I always did. I'm developing apparently some retinal scarring in my right eye, which is my strong eye. So that's presenting difficulty.
That's a different problem.
I can see that. I know that as I get older, I find it increasingly more difficult. I can still, if I really try, glimpse M33 with the naked eye from here. But it's getting harder and harder. And I know that that I'm beginning to get older. And it happens to everybody. It's not something to mourn. You know, as Keats's Ode to Autumn, you have your pleasures too. It's very, very important and very
Thank you.
significant.
There's a cure for that. It's called aperture.
As John Denver said, it turns me on to think of growing old.
Did you say aperture, Michael?
Yes, I did.
And binocular viewing also helps. It's to get bigger binos.
All right, any questions online for David? All right, well, listen, David, thank you so much for sharing your evening with us here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
And I guess we're gonna shut down the Zoom now. So I want everybody in the room to stick around because we have some announcements. Thanks a lot again, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Really enjoyed your storytelling. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. It was an honor to listen to you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
It was
Thank
great.
you.
Folks. Bye-bye.
Come visit.
We have